Imagine if every chat you had with AI, every question, fear, late night curiosity was saved, but not by you, by someone else. This isn't science fiction. It's happening right now. And if we don't change course, AI won't just answer your questions. It'll start shaping your mind and how you think. Hello, and welcome to this special edition of Blockchain Bylines. My name is Cary, co-founder and vice chairman of blockchain.com. Over the past few months, our team has been working on a secret special project, one of the most important launches in blockchain.com's history. It's something we believe addresses one of the most important challenges in today's digital world, which is how we interact with AI. And today, I'm joined by my co-founder, blockchain.com CEO, Peter Smith, to talk about what we've built, why we built it, and the bigger questions it raises about data, ownership, and the future of AI. Okay, let's get into it. So the early days of the internet, we've basically grown up really as the first generation where almost all of our sort of maybe pre-adolescent and adolescent thinking was sort of engaged with the internet in some way, whether it was early chat, GeoCities, AOL, maybe MySpace, and then obviously Facebook, Twitter.
ICQ.
And ICQ, yeah, of course. So when you think about it, how did trust sort of permeate in the early days and privacy on the internet? And like, how did you start to interact with those things? And when did you sort of realize that, you know, the internet was this Wild West, but also it wasn't immediately apparent, you know, that those things would maybe be important, or was it important for you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, I think like we saw the internet change so much at like various points in time. There's been these sort of like compressed periods of change. And I think we're living through another one of those right now. So a couple that, you know, come to mind previously is when we went from really a search dominated internet from what was more of like an index or list dominated internet. So there was like when Google came out and really started to organize all the world's information, and suddenly you could like Google things. And, you know, I was talking to someone recently who's a little younger, and they have no recollection of the pre-Google internet.
Yeah.
Right. But it was actually kind of a mess to navigate it, right? And it was hard to find information. And so that was a huge change, right? And the way that we use the internet, the utility of the internet, almost completely changed in an 18-month period. I think another period where we saw that happen was when smartphones came out. You know, the iPhone, and then of course that was followed by the App Store. And people started building these apps that were, you know, in your pocket. And before that, like you went home, you dialed up and you got on the internet. You didn't like, the internet wasn't like a part of your life hour by hour. And so there was this huge sort of like change in what you did with the internet as a result of smartphones and the Apple App Store. I think that, you know, the change that we're seeing today is on that order of magnitude of the last two that I talked about, if not a lot bigger, which is we're increasingly interacting with the internet. You know, and so these large language models are not AI, they're not AGI, and that's something that I feel strongly about, and I don't know if LLMs will even lead to AGI, but they're a new layer for how we interact with the internet. And that goes in terms of like using the internet to think, using the internet for information retrieval, you know, even down to like, okay, I want to book a flight. Like, I now turn to an LLM to look at the best way to get from point A to point B, right? And so this is representing sort of a step change in how most of us interact with the internet. And I think, you know, that's probably one of the most interesting things about where we are today from sort of like a society who uses the internet perspective.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, you hear these theses sometimes where like Internet 1.0 was all about basically searching at data or looking at data. The Web 2.0 was about, you know, basically people publishing a lot more information, and it disintermediated everything from the music industry to media. And then Web 3 was about giving people keys over digital rights on the internet, a property rights system. And to me, the keys to the internet are very, very interesting because data is really your new DNA. In a lot of ways, you know, we lock our houses not because we're fearful or hiding, but we lock our houses because that's where we own stuff. We own our homes, we own our possessions in those. And to me, it's the reason why this conversation around privacy and ownership is so key is because the most intimate and important things are always behind privacy in private situations. And so there's been this challenge because all of these LLMs have been trained essentially, especially on the millennial minds that have grown up basically from like 1985 forward. So I think we're at this really interesting moment too, because we have to define how we're going to interact and protect, privacy in this era. And it's more important than ever. So I want to talk a little bit about this because to me, when we think about why privacy is so key and relevant, it enables us to be vulnerable. It enables us to unlock the emotions to our heart and how we think. And we need to be able to have private conversations that aren't censored or coerced and more. And so let's dig in a little bit to maybe how you first sort of thought about AI when you started playing with it, maybe a few years ago or even before that with other tools that sort of started to like take us down this path we're on today. What were your sort of first, oh, this is changing. This is like bigger than a new UI. This is, an evolution, a step function change to the internet.
Well, it's a good question because, coming from sort of my background, there's a lot of sort of math and like quantitative research, like using a lot of these sort of machine learning tools for a long time. And so I think that a lot of the sort of underlying methodologies haven't changed that much. But the big change was definitely the interface layer.
Yeah.
Which is, the first time that you use ChatGPT, which, they figured out how to sort of give us a way to interact with a large language model that works for an average everyday person, which was via this chat interface. And I remember using it, and honestly, most of the responses from the large language model were like not very useful. But I remember using it and seeing how easy it was to interact with it and understand intuitively what was going on. And being like, oh shit, like this is gonna be big.
One of the things that became obvious to me is that, people are going to turn to this thing for their most intimate issues, stuff that they'd be maybe embarrassed to talk to somebody about, maybe a health issue, it might be a legal or a financial issue, maybe relationship advice. It could be exploring their sexual orientation or anything like that. And then it became concerning to me how these systems would and how they would responsibly interact with your mind. And so how do you think about that? And why is, we don't want just like those most important personal explorations to basically be weaponized against us. If I have a bad day and I go to my ChatGPT and I'm sort of complaining about, some stress I have in my life, and then it starts recommending self-help books to me, and then drug manufacturers are recommending Zoloft to me and Xanax to calm down and all these other things. I don't want to be bombarded by, basically surveillance capitalism on the stuff that's, really most precious to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult issue because on one hand, like these LLMs are really good at being sort of people's counselors,
relentlessly
doctors.
patient.
Like I've seen some interesting research where like there's less sort of like spurious 911 calls now.
Interesting.
Because people go to the LLMs to be like, do I have
the
a
spider bite?
emergency?
Is it going to kill me?
Correct. Yeah. And like actually the LLMs are, particularly on voice mode, are amazing at talking people through panic attacks.
Ah, interesting.
So, like if you have to think about it, like the LLM on voice mode is probably like maybe not the best therapist in the world, but it's certainly close.
Right.
And so, if you just think about people who have anxiety or panic attacks, having access 24/7, more or less for free, to let's call them A grade or A- grade therapist in their pocket to talk them down from a panic attack, that is life-changing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right. So there's these huge upsides to this thing. Now, the same downside is that, if we go back to sort of Google search, Gmail, all this, I remember Gmail came out and it was like, don't worry about giving us your data. Like it's going to be free. We're going to be treated with privacy, blah, 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 blah. Now, 20 years later, it's very clear that Google takes that and mines what's going on in your life to give you better retargeted advertising.
Yeah. You became the product.
You become the product.
Yeah.
And so these things don't usually start with that, but almost every consumer product on the internet, in fact, literally every consumer product on the internet, has ended in the inevitable conclusion of selling your data to make you buy things or do things.
Yeah.
Right?
To influence you.
Even Amazon today makes most of their profit margin on advertising. It's like, they've sold you shit for 20 years to build a profile about how you should be advertised and targeted.
Sure. They anticipate you.
And there's Amazon's really convenient. I enjoy it a lot. But like I think this is where these LLMs and people are like, well, this won't happen. It's like, okay, it's not happening today. But if the inevitable conclusion of almost every consumer product on the internet has been to have your data taken for targeting,
Yeah.
you know, and it doesn't matter who you're talking about, Microsoft, Google, Meta, it's all ends up there. Okay, what's more likely to create positive things for the good of humanity on the internet? Blockchain, technology, crypto, with AI and large language models as a part of that ecosystem,
Right.
or large language models brought to you by
Your feudal overlords.
your feudal overlords from California.
Yeah, I think
Right?
that's right.
And I think that's like, even if you don't know all the technical details and you don't know all the implementation pathways, you can just step back and be like, okay, look, like the crypto guys, and girls, like, who have brought us so much positive things as a generation, or our feudal overlords from California.
Yeah.
I think that's a super easy choice to make.
Yep. So this is, I think, arguably the most important reason why private AI, needs to be an alternative to consumers, and they should understand what they're going to get if they don't have a private conversation. And it's clear that they're going to feed, an ever-growing body of knowledge about themselves to a system that will eventually lead to a conclusion, which is, how do I make money off of everything I've learned? So let's talk a little bit about June. So we did a keynote, introduce June AI to the world. I want to talk a little about your vision and how you've gone about thinking about this team, prioritizing this and all the other things that the company could be focusing on. You said, and put out a memo to the whole company a couple months ago, which was everyone needs to be thinking about how AI is integrated into their day-to-day at work. We have to be practicing about this, and we have to come up the curve fast. And you've sent out a few of these like very famous emails. I'm sure they're going to end up in a business review at some point, where it's like, hey, this is an all hands on deck situation, and the world's changed. We're going to be at the front of this thing. So, when you get those convictions and like talk to us a little bit about how you then take that into a product development process.
Yeah, I think in reality, the work on June started quite some time before that email had gone out, and really actually started with me sort of gathering a pretty small elite group of engineers together. And we spent about 3 weeks together, and I was there every day of that, figuring out what June would be, what it would look like, and how to get started building. And I'll talk about June more in a minute, but I think, that email I sent about having the world having changed it's super clear. The world has changed. The way that we work 5 years from now is going to be totally different the way we work today. Even our workflows now are different. And it's only going to accelerate. Like, people are like, okay, well, the model can't do this, can't do that. I'm like, look, like, we're 2 years into this, and like the model could barely do any of the things today that it does. Right? So you push that out another 5 years, and it's like, wow. At the same time, I balance that with being very firmly convicted that LLMs and for what it's worth, Microsoft Research, Google Research, both share this view that LLMs will not lead to AGI. Has a lot to do with how transformer technology works, and sort of like some of the limitations in the approach around learning and reinforcement. But so I don't, I'm like sort of in between the people that are like, this is going to be AGI and the, it's going to take over the world in the next 3 years, and people who think that the world is not going to massively change just because we now all have these like super powerful assistants in our pockets. And so, sort of like primary and secondary impacts of these LLMs on a daily life are going to take years to figure out. But I think that, for us as a company, we have to start that adaptation now. And we have to do it really well.
Yeah. One of the things I'm proud of at blockchain.com, we founded the company over a decade ago. We built one of the most widely adopted non-custodial wallets in the world. We put users firmly in control of the most precious thing they could own, which was a key to unlock wealth that could move anywhere in the world instantly, basically for free. And that model that really embraced decentralization, privacy first, and an extremely high degree of security basically helped forge a multi-trillion-dollar industry and has been copied and mimicked by almost every other blockchain company or digital asset firm over the past decade. And so I think there's this kind of unique vantage, which was, by participating in building these tools that sort of enabled economic freedom, we've sort of been, our own patterns have sort of led us to this path of, well, how do we protect our minds in this future state where the alternative is you've got these huge centralized, big technology companies. And just like in 2008, there were a few centralized huge banks that almost broke the whole world. And now we've got a few centralized giant tech companies that have built these fairly impressive capabilities. But it looks again like they're going to try and turn their customers into the products. And to me, if the rallying cry in 2008, 2009 was we need to build an alternative financial system for the world, it's now we need to build an alternative AI system that serves the interests of the people that are creating the data, that are feeding this thing, and ultimately put people more firmly in control of their own mind and their choices. And so let's talk a bit about June AI. How do you think about the main differentiation between what June is offering and sort of the alternatives in these, huge LLMs and what I would describe as basically highly concentrated, highly monopolized surveillance AIs?
I think, the first thing that the June platform does is offer people a choice of models. You get to choose any model on the platform. I think that's really powerful. I think the second thing is, you get to know where your data is going or where it's not going. And that is really the most important part of this.
Yeah.
Is that you can be 100% certain that your data is not going to be used to retarget. You can upload a lot of data and have a higher sort of quality of inference, a higher quality of analysis, but you don't need to worry that that data is being retained, the model is being trained with it, and you can, upload your data and run different models on top of that same data set. I think the other thing that, will happen in the future is that we'll also sort of launch the ability to decentralize the compute behind the network. And so you'll have a decentralized compute network as well that you can, be a consumer of or a provider to.
Walk us through like a quick, 12 to 18 to 24 months. One of the features that's in this product is a leaderboard. You sort of left us dangling at the keynote around what that's going to be about, but maybe just a little bit of a hint would be interesting.
I mean, look, the leaderboard, is partly just kind of fun. Like when you're building new products in the early days, nothing is going to be perfect. One of our, really core beliefs as a company is that products are best built in the open. I'd rather launch something way too early than way too late.
Yeah.
And be able to respond to user feedback and see how people are using something so we can improve it based on real use rather than just sort of hypothetical.
Customer's best teacher.
But to do that, you also want to encourage a lot of use quickly. And I think people are competitive. And, the leaderboard has been super helpful in internal testing, at least. And then the other thing, is I do think that you need a model, an economic model, that's not just selling people's data.
Yep.
And this is where crypto becomes really interesting. Because crypto is really the only thing that's happened on the internet where the end consumer isn't, the product. When you have crypto protocols and you're building products around a crypto protocol and a token as well, you actually don't need to make the user the customer.
Yep.
You don't need to basically live off of your users and their data. And so, the points, the leaderboard, the points, that's obviously building to a place where, we can create an economic model and an economic driver for the June platform. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what that looks like over time and how that's shaped.
I think this is what is one of the most exciting developments right now is really this intersection between crypto and AI. And so I think at blockchain.com, we don't want your data. We don't want to predict your behavior. We want to protect it. And we have been pioneers in protecting people's most important data for well over a decade, which makes us uniquely suited in this era to provide an alternative to surveillance AI. One of the values that we've always had is just to be relentless in the pursuit of helping people do things and have agency. And I'm so proud to be working on June AI with you. We are going to put an assistant in your pocket that is for you to listen to your most intimate thoughts, to work with you as a coach, to help you build your businesses, to do whatever you want and do it on your terms. So your data, your AI, that's what June is all about.
Well, thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it.
All right. Cheers.